Hello beans, I just want to apologise in advance. I'm recovering from a bit of a cold, so my voice sounds about an octave lower than normal. We are going to talk about strength training today. What qualifies me to talk about this topic in any amount of depth is that it is my job. I am a strength coach with a focus on injury resistance and performance improvement for endurance athletes. What we'll be covering is a very simplified rundown of how to approach strength training as a runner, because it's just a YouTube video, but hopefully the information here will enable you to get started or to improve on what you're already doing. Firstly, strength training for runners isn't actually going to look that different to strength training for a lot of other sports. We can use strength training to create marginal enhancements in performance, but at this stage we're not really going to worry too much about that. For the most part, we're just going to be looking at getting stronger in general so that your body can cope with more. In this video, I'll be covering mostly gym-based strength training. I will go over home-based stuff in a more comprehensive fashion at a later date. I'm going to talk you through the key elements of a lower body strength training program, why each element is beneficial, and whereabouts in your session it should ideally be placed. Now, a lot of what I'm going to be going over is just stuff that's good to be doing anyway. It's good for day-to-day life. It's good to be doing these sorts of things as you're getting older to improve your bone density and whatnot. So this isn't necessarily entirely running specific, but it will help you and your running. So this is the key thing I want to stress. This is training that's good in general. Yes, it will help your running, but really most people, particularly if you're living a fairly modern, relatively sedentary lifestyle, these sorts of movements are going to benefit you across the board. As I said, this video is going to be pretty simplified and fairly straightforward. It's more of a starting point. So if you're already strength training and you just want to maybe change a few things up and get a better understanding of how to put a program together, then this will be a good starting point. If you're brand new and you don't have access to a coach, then this would be a good starting point. If you do have access to a coach, go to a coach. Anyway, on with the video. Alright, so the warm-up doesn't necessarily need to look a certain way. Maybe you've cycled to the gym, maybe you've run to the gym, maybe you just want to do a little bit of mobility work before you get started. This part of the workout doesn't necessarily need to take up a lot of time because we are going to be doing warm-up sets for all our key exercises. So in the earlier part of the workout, prior to doing any of our main exercises, ideally you will just do one set, maybe two sets if you feel like you need to, of lighter weight, body weight to lighter weight, to just warm up your muscles for the main movement that you're about to do. So in essence, the warm-up is sort of integrated into the earlier part of the workout anyway. First up, plyometrics. We will be performing plyometrics in the earlier part of the workout because we want our neuromuscular system to be pretty fresh when we're doing these. We are going to utilize plyometrics primarily to improve tendon health. While doing this, you will also improve your neuromuscular coordination. This means you'll have greater control over movements that involve stopping, starting, and changing direction. You'll develop the ability to have faster muscle contractions, generating more speed and greater force production. All of these things combined will reduce your injury risk. Now, there is some misinformation with regards to what a plyometric movement actually is, and I will use the worst offender in this misinformation case as an example. The box jump in and of itself is not a plyometric movement. For a movement to be plyometric, it must have a landing phase directly preceding a takeoff phase. However, you can make a box jump plyometric. As an example, here is a box jump performed in a non-plyometric fashion, and here is a box jump performed in a plyometric fashion. There is a ton more detail to go into here, but I'm going to try and keep this as succinct as possible, so I'm going to move on. The first type of plyo most of you are likely to be doing is a low load, high rep plyometric. This type of plyo can be utilized as a warm-up movement, and it is going to be the most accessible form of plyometric for most people. It's just helping you prepare the tendons for the work you're about to do, and it's also going to help you get used to practicing that rapid ground contact time at a low level of risk. You're priming yourself both physically and mentally, and then once you've got used to this form of plyo, you can move on to to single-legged plyometrics. Please keep in mind that single leg work will probably need to be built up over time. You're probably not going to want to dive into this right away. As you get more confident, you can add things like directional changes into your single leg plyometric work. Now that you're a little more warmed up, we can look at high load, low rep plyometrics. Obviously, as we're running, as we increase the intensity, we're going to reduce the volume of the work we're doing. We've got to remember that we're aiming to create lasting adaptations, so we don't want to fatigue our tendons and muscles to a point that they cannot recover effectively from. To keep things simple, the example, I'm just going to stick to one example today. The most accessible form of plyometric movement for most people is going to be the broad jump. You're not going to need any equipment to do this, you're just going to need a space on the floor that is big enough to do at least 2 consecutive jumps. And you are probably going to start off by doing quite a small number of repetitions for this exercise. But obviously, as you get more confident and as you get stronger, you can increase the number of repetitions. Depending on the amount of space you have, you might be able to do them all consecutively, or you might have to do them 2 at a time and kind of just go backwards and forwards in the space that you have. You work with what you've got. Moving on, it's time to talk about heavy bilateral compounds. These movements are going to be performed after your plyometrics. You still want to be relatively fresh for these because there is quite a lot of neuromuscular fatigue in lifting heavy weights. The purpose of these movements is going to be to work on your top end strength. While we're doing that, you'll also end up improving your recovery time, your running efficiency, and you'll improve your force production. This sort of training will also improve your tendon strength and your overall level of mobility. Rep ranges, again, we're going to keep this really, really simple, just for the sake of giving you something to work with without taking an hour and a half of your time. For these heavier exercises, if you're new to strength training, you are probably going to want to start off with an 8 rep range. This is going to allow you to get used to the movement and to build up a bit of muscle. You are not going to turn into a bodybuilder. Believe me, I've been training for over a decade. I do strength training 4 times a week. I do not look like a bodybuilder. So you're going to start off working in this 8 rep range. You're going to build up a bit of muscle, and that's because we need that muscle to work with to build on when we move on to the next stage. Ideally, we're probably going to be starting off with about 3 sets of 8 reps. If you feel that's too easy, you can increase that up to 5. You're probably going to want to just start off with the 3 just so you can get yourself used to it, and then build up as you feel more confident and comfortable with the movements. We're probably going to be working with this 8 rep range for a minimum of 4 weeks, preferably 8 to 12 weeks if you can. And you want to be working with a weight that's challenging. Obviously at the beginning you're going to be feeling things out, but by the end of this initial stint, you're going to want that last rep of every set to feel pretty hard. Like you probably could do maybe 1 or 2 more reps if you had to without your form collapsing, but we don't want to go absolutely maxed out on every set. We just need that last rep to feel challenging. Once we've got past this initial stage and you feel a bit more confident, we can start looking at increasing the resistance and reducing the reps. With running, really we want this heavier stuff to be low volume because it's going to reduce the amount of overall fatigue. We already do loads of endurance stuff while we're out running, so we don't need to do more of it in the gym. Again, this is very simplified, but we're just going to reduce to 5 reps. If you really want more specific programming, get a coach. And once again, as with the 8 rep sets, you want to build up to a point where that 5th rep in each set feels really hard. Maybe you could do an extra one if you had to, but you're not going to want to. And again, when you move down to this lower rep range but higher resistance, you probably again want to just go back to maybe doing 3 sets and build it back up to 5 sets. Let yourself get used to it at any stage. When you're increasing the intensity, let yourself get used to it. Okay, key movements to learn. In this section of the video, I'm not going to go into a load of technical detail. There's tons and tons of resources out there on how to do all the movements that I'm going to talk about. So I'm not going to waste time on that here. I'm just going to make suggestions as to what to look at, and I will put some links down in the description as to like useful videos that go over the movements that I mentioned in this video in a comprehensive and easy to follow fashion. So you will get a lot out of learning to do a barbell back squat and learning to do a conventional deadlift. If your gym has a trap bar, then a trap bar deadlift is a great alternative. It's a little bit more sport specific. It allows you to lift more weight with less mechanical complexity, and it has a lower injury risk than the conventional deadlift does. So if you've got access to a trap bar, by all means use it. Also, if your gym has coaches that are just kind of floating around on the floor, never be afraid to ask them for advice on just form cues and whatnot to go over. And once again, if you want extra help, hire a coach. If you don't feel very confident tackling these movements, you can start with simpler variations and just give yourself more time to get used to it. It doesn't really matter how long it takes you to get a feel for it. If you want to spend 8 to 12 weeks just doing easier stuff, just so you feel more confident to then move on to the harder stuff, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. You can just use dumbbells or use kettlebells as dead weights, just to allow yourself to get used to these movements. If you want to do more complex kettlebell exercises, please go and see an instructor about that kind of thing, because it's very easy to cause yourself really quite significant wrist injuries if you try and handle kettlebells without really knowing what you're doing. Single leg compounds. These are really useful for anyone to have in their program. So unilateral or single leg exercises can help address imbalances. They can help improve your single leg strength, your tendon strength and your stability, and they'll just support all the other things that the bilateral movements are doing as well. Running is a single leg sport effectively, so while it's good to have a decent overall level of strength, it is important to kind of have that slightly more specific strength work in there as well in the form of single leg exercises. And again, for simplicity, I'm just going to look at 2 movements that most runners will get a lot of benefit from. All right, first up is everyone's favorite exercise, the Bulgarian split squat. This is a hard exercise and I do not know anyone who actually likes it. Fortunately, it's one of the best exercises available for working on single leg strength. It's also relatively accessible. You're probably going to be able to find some way of setting up in whatever gym or home-based exercise situation you're in to be able to do these things. For these single leg exercises, we're going to be looking at a rep range of about 8, maybe up to 10 if you hate yourself. And I would suggest doing 2 sets of each single leg exercise that you're doing. So aside from the Bulgarian split squat, we're just going to look at another pretty accessible exercise that most people are going to be able to do in some fashion. I would suggest using a single leg glute bridge. It is not the ultimate best exercise to be doing, but it is really accessible. And again, you are going to be able to find some way of doing this to your ability level in most exercise scenarios. Once again, I would be suggesting 2 sets of 8 to 10 reps. We're going to move on to single leg isolation exercises now. So these are exercises that are a single leg exercise, but they're pretty much zoning in on one muscle group and they're not using a lot of different joints. So these are good when we want to target areas that might be particularly weak, and there are certain areas that some runners are probably going to want to focus in a bit more on than others. These sorts of movements are more about kind of tidying up a little bit. We've got all the main work in the first bit of the workout, but these movements they're not going to be like that taxing for a lot of people. And if you were just doing these, it wouldn't be enough. So these are just kind of little extras to really like polish off our injury resistance. I would suggest if you've got access to a leg extension machine that you do single leg extensions. Again, roughly 8 to 10 reps and 2 sets will be absolutely fine. A lot of runners need quite a bit of help with strengthening around their knees, and the single leg extension allows you to build up the muscle just above the knee, and it's just really going to help with taking impact when you're on like downhill sections on a road race, if you're doing trail races. I know my quads tend to need a lot of help, so I have these in my program most of the year. If you can, just hold a little bit of a pause at the top of the movement and make sure you're nice and steady on the way down. Another key isolation exercise I would suggest is some kind of side leg raise. If you're able to do these with a cable machine, then that would be ideal. It just means you've got tension all the way through the movement. A resistance band is okay, but you do lose tension on the way back. So using a cable machine just means you have the same amount of tension all the way through the movement. Now this exercise in particular is targeting your glute medius. A lot of runners have a relatively weak glute medius, which is what causes IT band syndrome and other knee issues. So if you can throw this movement in there, it's just going to like put a little bit of icing on the cake, basically. As I said, if you're just doing these alone, it's probably not going to be enough overall because it's just not a high enough intensity or load to be doing a lot of decent work on your tendons, but it does help your glute medius, so it is helpful to have in there. Last isolation exercise I would like to suggest is a calf raise. You can do these in various different forms. I would suggest possibly just start by doing them on flat ground with a straight leg, and then if you feel a bit more confident, you can move to a step and try and get a bit more range of motion out of the movement. There are various other ways to do the calf raise. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here, just again, so this video doesn't end up being ludicrously long. Core work. I would suggest you don't necessarily need to do specific core work if you're doing all of this stuff. If you want to, or if you feel that your core is weak and does need work, then by all means do so. The key things with core work are just to remember that you kind of have two different sets of muscles in your core. You have your phasic muscles, which are kind of like the superficial muscles that you can see, kinda. If you have a six-pack for some reason, those would be your phasic muscles. These muscles are pretty strong, but they tire out very quickly. And you're going to work these by doing things like crunches, maybe hanging knee raises. The other set of muscles in your core are your stabilizer muscles. These are a bit weaker than your phasic muscles, but they have a lot more endurance, so they can go for a lot longer. These are the sorts of muscles that are worked when you're doing things like a plank. So if you are adding core work into your routine, just make sure you are doing movements that cover both your phasic and your stabilizer muscles. So just remember, so long as you're doing some core movements that involve moving while you're doing them, those are working your phasic muscles. And if you're doing some core movements that involve you being totally static while you're doing the movement, those are working your stabilizer muscles. So long as you've got a mix in there, then you're pretty much sorted. It's also worth just considering that you work your muscles on the front as well as the ones on the side. Again, I'm simplifying all of this massively. All right, that is basically all the detail that I'm gonna go over today. As time goes on, I will, when I've got sort of opportune moments to do so, I will zone in on specific areas of strength training and do more in-depth videos on those areas. So I am planning on putting out a specific video just covering just plyometrics in probably a couple of months' time, so keep an eye out for that. And I will do the same with other areas of strength training. If you do have any specific questions, or if there are any things that you would like to specifically see a video about, can you pop them down in the comments below and I'll add it to my list. If you have a really specific training query that you don't want to put in a YouTube comments section, I will put my business email down in the description so that you can email me. And I'll do my best to answer your question. If you are interested in coaching, if you're Sheffield based, I do have a few spaces for one-to-one clients at the minute. If you're not Sheffield based, but you still want to be coached by me, I'm so bad at this advertising myself thing. I do have a very limited number of online spaces. I am very much more of an in-person coach, but I will coach people online if I feel like we've got a decent kind of coach-client relationship there and that it's going to work, basically. But I am still happy to receive and answer general training queries. All right, that was a relatively rapid-fire look at how to approach strength training as a runner. As I said, I will go into more detail in future videos on specific topics. Hopefully, it's given you some idea of how to structure your sessions and a sort of a place to start if you're not entirely certain, or at least a way to kind of get going forward. But yeah, if you really want specific programming, I would recommend working with a coach. If you can find a coach who specializes in sport-specific training, then great. If you can't find someone who specializes in sport-specific training, then you can always look for someone who is just well grounded in general strength development. Really, as we're getting older, it's just important to be doing some kind of strength training. A lot of us, even if we're runners and we're out being active, we're still spending a lot of our days sat down. So it is still important to try and get these strength movements into our day-to-day lives. So I would always recommend working with a coach if you have access to that option. Anyway, this has probably ended up being a fairly long video, so I'm going to cut that here, and I will see you in the next one.